Hey BookTube, welcome back to Belle's Library. Tonight I want to share with you guys all of my August reads. I finished 8 books in August. I DNF'd one, and I partially finished a few. This was a pretty good reading month for me, and I did have a couple of surprises, so I feel like it was pretty satisfying. Today our family started up schooling for the year. I homeschool my children. This year I am homeschooling my last 4. So I have 9 children altogether. They are 25 down to 11. So I have my last 4 in school this year. It is my smallest group without having anybody, that's like little and not ready for school yet. So it's starting to go kind of on the downhill slope. This is my 22nd year of homeschooling. So it was a good day. I'm pretty wiped out. We do a literature-based method of schooling, so there was a lot of reading that took place today, but it was a good day. All right, so the first 2 books I finished, I actually talked about in my August mid-month wrap-up, so I won't talk about those here. That was Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen and The Witches by Stacy Schiff. It's a nonfiction sort of account of the Salem witch trials without a lot of rumors and fluff mixed in. She just kind of goes by what she could find in her research, and it was a good book. And Sense and Sensibility, of course, is always good. So then the first book I finished after those 2 was Wilkie Collins' A Rogue's Life. I love Wilkie Collins, and this was such a good story. So Frank Softly is from a family that is wealthy enough that he must keep up appearances, but not wealthy enough that they can always pay for him to keep up appearances. He ends up going rogue and gets himself into all kinds of trouble, embarrasses his family, and sets off on all kinds of fun adventures. And the book ends well and happy and good, and he's just funny. He has no apologies for the kind of guy he is, and so you can't help but love him as well. I would recommend picking this up. It's less than 200 pages, a super fun read by Wilkie Collins. All right, next up is not a normal read for me, but I really wanted to participate in Garbaugust, and so I grabbed Sweet Valley High Super Edition Spring Break. So I first found out about Garbaugust by watching one of Criminali's videos. He's one of the co-hosts for this August event. And basically, I guess the idea is to just read like the trashiest stuff you can find. Well, I'm not really into trashy stuff. And so I thought about what is the cringiest book that I can remember reading. And it was definitely a Sweet Valley High series. I read these when I was in the 5th and 6th grade. No parent should allow their 5th and 6th grader to read Sweet Valley High, let me just say. But my parents didn't know, and they were just kind of encouraging of whatever we wanted to read. So Elizabeth and Jessica are twins from California, and in this story, they go to Paris as spring break exchange students. And there they encounter really mean people and really cute boys, and they do all kinds of teenagery things, and then they go home, and it's ridiculous. Jessica is the twin who is always causing trouble, and Elizabeth is the twin who is always having to get her out of it. And I still, to this day, wonder, why do Jessica and Elizabeth, who are supposedly 16-year-old teenagers from California, why do they look like my middle-aged Aunt Barbara in every single illustration? All right, next up was The Real Jane Austen, A Life in Small Things by Paula Byrne. This is a book that I have been reading for a really long time, probably since the beginning of the year. I've just been reading it very slowly because the whole idea is that it is her life in small things. It is a slow read, I think on purpose. And basically this book just takes little things from her life and sort of talks about them in context and then talks about them within the context of her life. So for instance, it discusses the amber cross necklaces that her and her sister Cassandra were given by one of the brothers. So it takes that item, that small item from her life, and then continues on to talk about her religious practices and how she felt about God and different things, and she had written her prayers, that kind of stuff. So it does that. It just takes something little from her life and then uses it to elaborate on biographical information. There is a couple of things I really enjoyed about this biographer as opposed to several that I have read before. One is that I think that this author took great pains to sort of point out the philosophies and the politics that made Jane different from the normal, average woman of her day. Even if she wasn't able to sort of outwardly display her thoughts on things, we get a good look at how she really felt about society by reading her work and her letters. The author is true to that and kind of erased that prim and proper Jane that's kind of been thrust on us since the Victorians. But I also liked that the author didn't play down or even dismiss Jane's Christian faith like many authors do. She wasn't some kind of, forcibly sheltered pre-feminist martyr. She was just the Jane that I know. Another part that I really enjoyed this, and this is just a snippet from this book, but it talked about her brother George, who was sent to live with another family at a young age because he did have mental disabilities. And I've always been really bothered by that, and I think a lot of people have been really bothered by that. Like, why didn't they take care of their own son, right? Just because he had mental issues. But the thing is in those days, a lot of times they would be sent to prisons or asylums or workhouses if they had mental illnesses. And so this was actually a humane act by the Austens to send him to live with a family who could better take care of him. They didn't have as many children and as many responsibilities as the Austen family had. They ran a school in their home for a long time, plus their father was a reverend, and so this gave that son the opportunity to have the round-the-clock care that he needed from someone who could devote a lot more time and attention to him, and he didn't have to end up off in a workhouse or in a prison when his parents passed on and he wasn't able to provide for himself. So it was seen as a mercy, and it was neat to get that perspective so that I as well could see, yes, that was a mercy. If anything negative I would have to say about this book would be that there was a lot of repetition between chapters, and I think that was probably so that the chapters could be read as standalone chapters. However, when you're reading it straight through, which I think probably most people would do, it just seemed kind of, annoying. Things repeated a lot. Alright, this next book was really something special. It was really a surprise. This is Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. Now, I picked this up at a book sale earlier in the month. I don't think I actually posted that video. I need to do that. But I went and I had a book haul from a warehouse sale. And I picked this up just kind of on the fly, mostly because it had this picture of what I thought was like a campground on the front. And I was like, ooh, that seems, aesthetic for fall. But later on you find that that's not necessarily what's going on here. So this book was a National Book Award finalist, which kind of, after reading the synopsis, is one of the reasons why I did go ahead and go with it. Because it sounded to me like kind of a dystopian, it's futuristic, and it's kind of what happens 20 years after a plague on Earth, and then it goes back, right, to that time of the pandemic. And I just don't read stuff like that. I've never picked up anything like that. So when I first started it off, I thought it was going to be dystopian, but I soon realized this book is full of hope. I was pulled in right from the very beginning. Every character in this book, you see its good side and its evil side. And every character, no matter how evil they may have been, displayed some kind of trait that made me feel compassion for them. The author did an excellent job at making you realize this is somebody toxic, but they're also somebody human. So the story follows a traveling symphony who are traveling through the Great Lakes region, kind of like the Lake Michigan region, on the Chicago side, maybe coming down from Canada. At the time, there's no more borders because the world has gone through a devastating pandemic where people were getting the disease in the morning and dying by the evening. It was devastating. It killed 99% of the population. And so everything was just a wreck, and we were basically back to, nomad days. And so they were coming down, I believe, from Canada, down south through Chicago, and they were a symphony, but they put on plays, and it wasn't just like a music thing. They put on theater, and they put on Shakespearean theater. And so it has a dual timeline where it will flash back to the days before the pandemic, 20 years in the past, which would be our modern time now. And it follows this girl, Kirsten. She was a young child then, and she's the main character of the post-pandemic storyline. There are some characters that threaten the safety of these people. They are basically just searching for other survivors and trying to thrive, not just survive, and rebuild, and looking for areas in which people have rebuilt. And so it's hard to tell you very much about this without there being spoilers, but it goes back and forth, and it's just such a great book. It's such a special book. I'm really glad that I read this. I will be thinking about it for a long time, and I would love to find other books such as this one where it is in what could be a dystopian environment, but it was actually very hopeful. So my assumptions were made out to be not exactly correct by reading this book. All right, and then the last two books that I finished for the month are books that I did not want to read to begin with, but I am kind of forcing myself to read through 5 Christian fiction books because I need to talk about why, even though I am a Bible believer, I do not enjoy the Christian fiction genre. And so I thought before I just get on here and start ranting about it, I've actually had several people request me to make a video explaining why I don't enjoy it, because I've talked about it quite a bit here. Before I make that video, I thought I better give it another chance just to see if things have changed in the last whatever it's been. And so I went to Barnes & Noble and I purchased with my own money 5 Christian fiction books in different genres, and I am reading through them. So I finished 2 of them. So the first one is Shadows of Swanford Abbey by Julie Clausen. Now this book, the back, it starts off, Agatha Christie meets Jane Austen. How can you resist Agatha Christie meets Jane Austen? 2 of my favorite authors, right? You know how Jane Austen parodied a lot of the, Gothics and the silly fiction that was written in her day by writing Northanger Abbey? I think that this book that is supposed to model Jane Austen would actually be a great fodder for her parody. There's just weird turns of phrase, like the girl waved a nervous table napkin across the room at her friend or something, and the girl was nervous, but her table napkin wasn't nervous, was it? There's just weird coincidences, and then she's always hanging a lantern on it, right? Like, just, I don't know, don't write it. It's irritating, right? It's just irritating. But I'm thinking that really my actual problem is not necessarily Christian fiction. I think it's just general, genre fiction. I think I'm struggling. I think that it may be that I'm looking for something a little more literary, no matter what the genre is, and this is just a little too beach ready for me. I don't know. The book is just like filled with fills and fillers and fillings, and it really could have been a lot shorter than the 400 pages that it is. It's a very slow moving story. Nothing really even happens for 150 pages. I would not recommend. And which is sad, because I actually have enjoyed books by her in the past, which then makes me wonder, were those better books or have I just changed? And then the last one that I finished this month is called Outbreak by Davis Bunn. And this is another sort of plague book, and it's just so disjointed. It definitely tops the list of the worst books I've read in at least 10 years. And it just didn't age well. So this book was published in 2019, and it just heavily promotes quick vaccines, quick turnaround for remedies to, plagues and pandemics, untested. It goes really deep into the frustration that companies feel when they are tied up with red tape, and that red tape is testing out their vaccines and medications on clinical studies. And so the book just heavily pushes, let's get rid of that and let's just move this stuff forward to save lives. And I'm not getting political, and I'm not going to go either direction in this video, but I feel like because that's such a sensitive topic now, right? Looking back, It almost makes you wonder, like someone came along and were like, quick, we need a book about a pandemic that heavily promotes vaccines and trusting all of the leadership. And we need it before 2020. And it doesn't matter if it's good or not. It can totally suck. Just give us something. Like, I don't know. It's a really bad book. It's bad. But there's a pandemic, I guess, that breaks out in Africa, and it's in the seaweed, and it's because of drilling, and the people are eating the seaweed, and they're dying like fast and wiping out entire villages. And as soon as a hurricane comes and turns the tide, then it's all going to be headed for America. And so this team of people who are in no way qualified to do any of the things that they do, you don't even know how they got this knowledge in the first place, but somehow they're just like, woo-hoo. You know, it is a Christian book. Maybe God just went bing and they got the knowledge. I don't know. They are supposed to solve the problem like right away. And so they do. But here's the thing. I know all of that from reading the back of the book. That stuff doesn't actually even happen. They don't even discuss in detail. I mean, what I just gave you is more detail than the book actually gives you. Like, that's the detail of the back of the book. Like, it's just a bad book, guys. It's bad. Don't read this book. Now, I went on and on about the grammar, the wording, the annoying overuse of all kinds of ridiculous things that nobody says in my Goodreads entry on this book. I don't want to run it into the ground too badly, like, you know, like this. But if you want to know the ruthless details, go to my Goodreads and look for this one. All right, now the books that I am still in the middle of or completely DNF'd. I only completely DNF'd one book this month, and that was Shadow Castle by Marion Cockerell. Now, this was kind of one of those like palette cleansers that I just grabbed after finishing something, I don't know what. It's been on my shelf forever. It was on my kids' shelf for a while, then I put it on my shelf because they didn't want it. And I started reading and I was just like, boring. It was really a slodge. So I decided to DNF it. And when I went back to Goodreads and read, lots of people thought the same thing. They're like, oh, I love this as a kid, but as an adult, maybe not so much. So I DNF'd that one. That one's going to get unhauled along with Outbreak. And then a book that I talked about in my mid-month video, The American Revolutionaries by Milton Meltzer, is stories that have been compiled from first-hand accounts from the time of 1750 to 1800. So I was reading this for Historathon quarter 3, and I did read several of the stories. I'm about halfway through this, and I decided to put it away. They were just getting kind of boring and repetitious, and so I will finish this eventually, but it's kind of one of those things that I'll take like to the dentist or something when I'm just like have to sit, and so I will like force myself to read a story. It's kind of one of those, like I want to finish it, but I'm really not all that into it. So that's what I'm doing with that one. And then I don't think I read any more Grimm's fairy tales since I last talked to you guys about that, but that's one that's on my little pile that I kind of have been poking at a little bit this month. And then I have been reading Shakespeare's Sister. So I talked about this one. This book is basically a look at 4 or 5 writers from the time of Shakespeare, women writers. So the title of this book is based on kind of the thoughts from Virginia Woolf, where she said that if Shakespeare had a sister named Judith Shakespeare, wouldn't be well known, and nobody would give her, maybe they wouldn't even know her name, and that, if she wrote something, they would just publish it in her brother's name or whatever, because the women weren't allowed to write, they couldn't write, they had no, honor as writers or whatever in that time. So this author kind of blows that out of the water by bringing up 4 or 5 different women writers from the time, several of them within the court of Queen Elizabeth I. One of them is Queen Elizabeth I. And it's a good look at that. It's very thorough. However, I guess one thing that's kind of tripping me up, I'm about halfway through, and I put it aside for a little bit, partially because I'm doing this project on the Christian fiction books and I just want to get through them. But partially is because she is writing about these 4 different women and the queen, but she, instead of following their lives like through, like fully fleshing them out before you move on to the next unknown character, she is following a historical timeline. So you're watching these women sort of exist side by side, and so she'll tell a little bit of this lady's story and this lady's story, this lady's story, and this, and then she jumps ahead, you know, 5 or 6 years, and then we go back and tell everybody's story again, and it's just very confusing for people that you don't know, right? Because there's lots of other people here mentioned, other, you know, English court people, and if you're not following that very well, it's easy to get kind of confused. Now, I'm pretty familiar with the court of Elizabeth I and all the, you know, people involved in that and who married who and where they lived and all that kind of stuff. Like that I'm pretty solid with, but after her, not so much. And so that's where I'm at right now is, you know, King James and all that. So I'm kind of falling off a little bit, but I think that it's going to be okay. I just need a little break from it. So I do think this is a worthwhile read for sure, Shakespeare Sisters. And, you know, like I said, I think that my problem here with these fiction books is it's just that I'm looking for something a little meatier. Maybe serious isn't even the right word. Just like, can I say I'm looking for something a little bit smarter without sounding like a total snob? I don't mean to be snobby, it's just that some of these are just not doing it for me. So that's what I've been doing. And then what I'm reading now is The American Queen by Vanessa Miller. Now this is the third of the 5 Christian fiction books that I'm reading. I'm about halfway through this one and I'm loving this book. This is the story of a whole group of former slaves who leave their plantation and they start traveling north. And they are looking for a happy land that they can live in and be at peace and run things in the way that they want to run them and not be under anybody's thumb anymore and not be, you know, forced to do things they don't want to do anymore. And so they start off on this journey. Now we're to the point where they have found a place to stop and sort of begin a community. There are 200 of them now, where there were just 50 starting out. There have been births, there have been deaths, there have been marriages, and lots of name changes, which I think is pretty cool that these people were now able to change their identity, how they want to be known. I am so in love with this book. I am enjoying it so thoroughly. So this is a Black author, and I think that's a big part of it. I love reading books written by Black women. I don't know, there's something in just the wording, just the lyrical, just the way they speak and the way the thoughts that they put down. I can't even put my words together, but I absolutely love reading Black women literature. The first sentence: with hands planted in the dust of the earth, Luella Bobo's lungs filled with a smothering air of bondage, while she listened to her daddy wax eloquent about freedom. I love this. I'm really loving this story. So it's based on a true story, and when I'm finished, I'm going to look a little bit more into that. But apparently there really was a couple, the king and the queen of Happy Land, that went on this journey north with some of their friends, their newly emancipated peers, and where they found a place where they could start building the kind of life that they wanted to live. So loving this story. I'm so glad I picked this up. All right, guys, that is what I did for August, my August reads. It was a good month. I learned a lot and a lot about myself. I was happy to get to participate in Garbaugust with my cringy novel from grade school. So hope everybody's doing well. I will see you soon. Bye-bye.